Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Danielle Van Hook from the Alden in McLean, Virginia, and I am here today with three special colleagues and friends from the field, and we are going to have a discussion about what's going on right now in the theater for young audiences aspect of our field. So before we jump into it, I would love for you all to introduce yourselves. Let's start with Ashley.
I'm Ashley St. Armand. I do lots of things and they all find themselves in the space for family programming. I'm a vocalist, a songwriter, a playwright, an author, and I make lots and lots of things for little people.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah McCarthy from Dandelion Artists. I'm a booking agent and a creative producer and a connector in this field.
And last but not least, Brian.
Hello, my name is Brian Fahey. I am the Senior Director of Education for the Austin Theater Alliance in Austin, Texas. We are a nonprofit presenting theater. We operate two spaces, the Paramount Theater, which turns 110 years old this October, and
Congrats.
the State Theater. Thank you. The State Theater, our smaller space next door, which opened in the 30s. So we operate both of those spaces under the nonprofit known as Austin Theater Alliance. We serve about 25,000 Central Texas youth every year. And part of what I do is program a season of shows for family and school audiences.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to jump into this today. The four of us luckily found ourselves in Bethesda, Maryland this past May for the TYA USA conference. And now, if you haven't heard, TYA USA stands for Theater for Young Audiences. And TYA USA is an organization that does a lot of really wonderful things for the sector of the field, including hosting a yearly convention that includes breakout sessions, full-length performances, lots of networking opportunities, and two things that I think are really specific to that conference: a song slam. I wrote slap. That's when that came out funny. A song slam cabaret, which features music from TYA musicals and presentations about current research happening. So, for any of you, is this your first TYA USA?
It was my first time going. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was super excited to share this experience with everyone I saw there, and I didn't know that I would know anybody besides Sarah, who I roomed with, and I was entirely planned to cling to her arm the entire time and be her arm candy. And I actually knew so many people there, and it was really lovely to see my colleagues on both sides of the stage represented in this space. I mostly perform children's music and operate in that family music space. And so it's new for me to join the community of other people who make theater for young audiences. So it was really great to see familiar faces and to make new friends too.
Yeah, it was my first one as well. But I'm curious from you veterans, what do you think in your experience kind of makes this TYA USA conference different from a lot of the other touring conferences that I see you at as well?
So this was just my second time at TYA USA. And both times I've been so impressed by the in-depth professional development sessions. The topics are so thoughtful and well-researched and diverse and interesting. I feel like that is a huge standout. To have so many in-depth, interesting conversations, all focused on work for young audiences, is what makes this conference really special. And the fact that more and more people are attending this conference. You know, it really is a place where our community is gathering, and that just feels really exciting. It's got its own momentum.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This was my third TYA USA conference. I think what I appreciate most about this conference in particular is that all different sectors of the TYA space sort of come together. You have presenting folks representing presenting theaters, representing producing theaters. You have folks working in higher education, K through 12 education, teaching artists. It's a space really where everyone can come together. And I think at least when I think about my own conference, regular conference attendance, there are conferences that I focus on that are much more geared towards booking a season of theater for young audiences. But this is a space where I know colleagues that are from organizations very different from my own will be there, and we can all learn from each other and celebrate the work that each other is doing.
Yeah, and I also just felt like it had a different pace. It felt like people were mostly doing the same thing at the same time or the same type of thing. And it felt more like we were all there together rather than we were all on our own individual track of just trying to figure it out and being ships passing in the night. And Brian, when I saw you, you had a colleague there with you. Is that something that, is part of what you would normally do at a conference?
Yeah, my colleague also, Brian.
Oh, that's
Shout out
right.
to Brian Wynn. He manages a lot of our field trip programming at the Paramount. So this was his second conference. But that was something that my predecessor did with me when I started at the Paramount. I'm entering my 11th year at the theater this summer. But when I started, I was the associate director of education under our director of education, Jen Luck. And she brought me into iPay conferences early on. So I got to meet Sarah and other agents through that conference and other TYA artists. So that's something I've tried to do with new folks that have joined my team is find the professional development space that is going to speak to them and their work. And then an opportunity for them to be introduced to presenting colleagues around the country and agents and artists as well.
Yeah, I love that. And we did have a good bit of time in the schedule to network and to talk and to meet new people, like we've all mentioned. I'm wondering if there were any themes or things that kept feeling like it was coming up, things that felt like they were top of mind this year.
I would say there was a major theme of advocacy for the arts. The conference was happening on the heels of the NEA cuts, and people literally, theater companies and artists had come to the conference literally having just lost their NEA grants or being on the verge of losing their NEA grants. And I think this sense of working together and trying to persevere and fight our way through a difficult political time was definitely something that a lot of people were talking about.
I noticed the theme of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really fascinating because that's such a hot and scary topic right now nationally. And I really applaud the conference and the way that the different sessions were handled, as well as the conversations that I participated in outside of conference sessions, that were really focused on how do we actually solidify these ideas and make them approachable and make them meaningful in our organizations in the way that we create art for young people. That was really on top of mind for me, and I was happy to see that that was on top of mind for many others. And sessions that could have just been like, this is a really fun way to present this information, became presenting this information this way is actually really inclusive for these certain, folks or, organizations because dot dot dot. And so just the depth of thought around those topics was really intriguing and meaningful to me.
Yeah, I think definitely the conversation around the NEA sort of galvanized everyone and brought everyone together. I also think in the challenges with the NEA and other funding challenges that I know a lot of organizations are facing around the country, I feel like it brought everyone together in a unique way. And I noticed sort of like a lot of silos being broken down. I went to a few sessions presented by producing TYA companies, and we're a presenting theater, but I had the opportunity to learn from them and think and hear what challenges they're facing and finding similarities and common ground there and being able to learn from each other. I also have noticed in seasons recently a lot of organizations that would define themselves as producing theaters are now presenting more artists and more work on their seasons. And then a lot of the work that Sarah's doing that I'm sure we'll talk about with producing or sorry with presenting theaters, trying to focus more on an investment on commissioning work, which sort of moves them maybe less towards the strict presenting model into a bit of a producing model. So I really recognize like those silos are sort of breaking down, and those conversations that are happening at folks that are defined by very different types of organizations, different size of organizations, but everyone's sort of learning from each other and coming together to discuss the challenges that everyone's facing.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was such a diversity of types of organization there, types of job titles, but at the same time, a lot complete shared goals and shared vision, and just a real openness to partnering and collaborating and finding the future together. Just such an incredible group of people.
Yeah,
Uh,
I felt the
yeah.
same way. That's what I meant is that, I think before it'd be easy to think of DEI as this like corporate thing that we all have to achieve. And now because there's the threat of it being stripped away, it becomes more about, oh, this is actually inclusivity for all of us, no matter what your demographic is. And it has less to do with who you are as an individual, but what can we make together creatively, professionally, logistically. That's really the spirit of the DEI movement, and I really felt that in this space, which was really cool.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
I appreciate coming together and being asked to define our shared values. Um,
Yeah.
and I felt that really strongly, especially coming out of that closing session that we were all a part of.
Ooh, spoiler.
Dun, 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 dun.
Um, so I really do want to dig into some of these professional developments. Brian, I know you went to the session How to Grow Audiences and Revenue Through Access. And I'm wondering if like what were your takeaways from that? What are some things that we can be thinking about?
Yeah, it was a wonderful session led by Kristen from the Alliance Theater and Lori from Imagination Stage, also one of the hosts of the conference. Those are both organizations that are largely producing theaters. The opportunity to learn from them as they are producing a season of TYA. Access is a big focus for my organization, and we're growing our access programs. So I took a lot of notes and learned a lot from this session. I think a lot of the focus was on the idea that the return on access programs is not often immediate, but it's an investment towards audience growth, especially when you think about the space of theater for young audiences. The challenge we're all facing is that we're constantly needing to introduce our work to new audiences because they're aging out of our work maybe at a faster pace than they are when you think about theater for an older audience. I really appreciated that. Being a major takeaway of the session was that you invest in your access programs early on and you'll see that return. One thing the Alliance Theater does that I think is very smart is their theater for the very young, their TVY work is all free. So that felt like a really great way to connect with new parents who are probably experiencing that work for the first time, maybe experiencing the work of the Alliance Theater for the very first time. But if they're able to come into that space and not worry about ticket sales and not worry about needing to budget for those sorts of arts experiences as new parents, but they are able to go to those shows as their students age, then they're probably more likely to then become regular patrons in the theater for young audiences space. And then, of course, the Alliance is doing wonderful work for all ages. So really looking at like the growth of that audience over time. So that was a big takeaway, especially as my organization starts to think more about presenting theater for the very young, which is something we hope to do in the future. So I took that away very strongly. Also, we talked a lot about pay what you can models, and one major takeaway from the session was verbiage around pay what you can versus pay what you wish. There was a bit of a discussion on the idea of pay what you can could be perhaps limiting to an audience because they're having to like self-identify what they feel like they may or may not economically be able to contribute. And the point was made that you may have audience members, and this was came out of some survey data that Seattle Children's Theater was doing, around their pay what you can, pay what you wish program. And they were advocates for moving the language to pay what you wish because they found that folks were not participating in the pay what you can program because they felt like that was not necessarily for them, but they also were not able to, you know, afford that baseline ticket price. So they just weren't coming at all. So a pay what you wish felt like a more gentle, inviting way of bringing in new audiences. So that was also a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Brian.
Yeah.
And Ashley, I'm really excited to know that you went to this teaching artist session, and I'm glad that you're here today to tell us a little bit about it. It's a fascinating topic: teaching without word, non-speaking teaching artistry in practice. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was really exciting to participate in that. And when I say participate, it was interactive and active workshop. And I love me an active participating workshop because, you know, you're left to experience it in real time instead of having it explained to you. And so save a few moments of them saying, you know, where we could sit and things like that. Right away, there was no language. And so we participated in sort of a mock workshop of how how to teach without words with us as the students. And I think, again, with these thoughts around inclusivity, around access, my mind directly went from this could be really fun to, oh, this is a really interesting way to include folks who speak a different language, who, you know, have different experiences in other ways, developmentally and so forth. And then as we continued with the activity, I also noticed that some people were really all in and some people were just observing and that it was okay. And so what we did was there was some drawing involved. There was like a drawing board and they would draw some pictures, but mostly it was pointing, it was movement, and us really just repeating the movements that they were doing. Again, not instructing us to necessarily repeat after them. And it was really interesting to see, okay, I'm going to do something. Now, how do you encourage someone else to do it without saying, you must do this after me? How do we encourage people and set up environments for them to play and things like that? And so it was really interesting to have the conversation afterwards, and it was so inviting and so fun that many of us didn't want to start speaking. She's like, okay, now we're going to talk about that. We're like, do we have to? Like, we were all kind of whispering. And so we were, through movement and encouragement, had the opportunity to pretend that it was raining and to play with each other and to encourage someone when their ice cream cone fell off their cone. That was my one. There was a draw. There was a drawing. There were several drawings on a board, and they would point to one and then look to the audience like, anybody want to explore this? And so there was an ice cream cone and some other things. And with the ice cream cone one, I pretended that my ice cream had fallen off, and someone else came to my rescue and brought me another cone. You know, and it was all through this really imaginative play. And what was interesting is, through the conversation afterwards, I found out that people who hadn't physically participated as much still had a wonderful experience, a very unique experience. And it was interesting how this opened it up to people who have different comfort levels around those sorts of things too. And as a teaching artist, but also as an artist who makes theater, I always have this question, and especially with the show I'm building right now: how do you encourage audience members to participate? How do you create an environment for people who don't feel as comfortable to also have a lovely time? Like, how do you facilitate this safe space of play for everyone, no matter what your background is, demographic, your ability level, your cultural background? And as we got into that part of the conversation, another, for your audience members, I'm Black, and there was another Black person in the workshop, and she was brought to tears because she was saying she's brought this kind of material to her students who are also Black and have had challenges with this. So then we had this conversation about not only difference in terms of abilities, language, you know, but cultural differences in play. Like,
Mhm.
what does it mean to play in this way if you are from an urban area and your family is Black and you don't play like this with your friends, or your family members don't joke around like this? Are my students going to think I'm a crazy person? And, you know, this sort of thing. And so it was a really interesting, how do you deal with behavioral issues, no matter what the children are, depending on their age level, when the play gets out of control, where they refuse to not speak? And so I was really curious. It was a really curious time for all of us. And it became this really communal space to end up loving on each other, which I wasn't expecting. It was cool.
That's super. That's a really unique way to think about teaching artistry. And just, I think of you so much as a musician and somebody that like relies on spoken word. So to think
Yeah.
about like not having that part of the artistry in it, like how has that changed the way you think about like concert performing or different classroom work that you're doing?
In some ways, I think I was doing some of this because yes, I'm a singer, but also there has to be a buy-in with my audiences, especially when I have, something around 6th to 8th graders. There's always a couple of minutes where they're like, is this cool enough for me to participate in? And so I realize a lot of what I do in that way to get them to buy in is nonverbal, right? And it's the way that I'm performing. It's the way that I feel comfortable with my bandmates on stage, right? If we don't look like we like each other and we're not having a good time, that doesn't invite the audience to have a good time either. So we establish that kind of environment. Like, we're enjoying this, we're going to have a good time. It's up to you if you want to participate in this. So even though there's call and response singing, I used to in my early career, I'll be honest, especially like family performances. And for some reason, specifically the dads, if they didn't want to participate, which was often the case, I would call them out and be like, come on, sir, like dance with your wife. And I would almost always get like a, no way, look on their face. And I realized that it's okay for them to enjoy this experience in their own way. And so finding different nonverbal ways and trying to incorporate some of the things I learned into how I do this on stage. And again, I'm creating a performance now that's somewhere between a musical theater piece and a concert, and there's going to require a lot of audience participation, especially from the adults in the audience. So I'm thinking about now, how do I do this? And I think a lot nonverbal is a good way to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Sarah, you were a presenter, part of a presenting group for one of the sessions. We've talked a little bit about it on this podcast, but the TYA Tour Development Collective, a new funding model. So I'd love it if you could just give us a little description of that and like some takeaways that felt like the audience had from learning about it.
The TYA Tour Development Collective is a group of 9 presenting organizations that have come together in the last year to commit to funding commissioning dollars toward the creation and development of new touring work for young audiences. And this is really something that I've been having conversations with for the last several years with other colleagues of mine on the steering committee, namely Daniel Hahn, Sarah Saltwick, Caroline Myers, and Sarah Morgulis. And we've over the last 2 to 3 years have put our heads together about like, how could presenting organizations actually work together to pool resources and to put meaningful amounts of funding together directly to artists to help support the development of new work, which every single presenting organization is like, what's new? We want to, what's new and happening from the artists out there. And agents like me are like, we need money to create new work. And this has really become an exciting organization. Well, it's not quite an organization. It's definitely a collective. It's a loose group of presenters that are each committing to hearing from the artist directly about the new work that's out there and deciding where to put their organization's dollars. I was joking on the panel, it's a lot more like Shark Tank than it is like a new grant organization. Like, it's really about artists coming on a Zoom call to pitch the presenting organizations and say, hey, this is my new piece and this is the kind of money I need. This was our first pilot year in doing it, and we weren't sure how successful it would be or if it would even like collapse halfway through. And not only was it successful, it really exceeded our expectations. We ended up with applications from 34 different artists that were incredibly high quality and dynamic applications. And the funding collective, each member of the funding collective, we target a $5,000 commitment to commissioning new work from each organization. So among 9 organizations, we thought we were going to have about $45,000 to sort of work with to distribute among the various artist applications. And in the end, the presenting members of the collective were so inspired by the projects that we heard about, the total was $74,000 that were committed in commissioning dollars this year. And when the members of our collective went back to their leadership at their organizations, the executive leadership was really inspired and wanted to put more into these projects. And that, I think, is one of the most inspiring things that came out of this first pilot year. And then secondly, just having a chance to talk about this new model at the TYA USA conference in a room that was packed full of people. We kept like pulling in more chairs and had people like
Yes.
sitting around, was the level of excitement, and other organizations wanting to join in, and other kinds of artists wanting to submit their new projects for consideration in future years. I feel like it's building its own momentum. It's been really great.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. And so I think one of the things about this conference that's a little bit different or more unique from others is we got to see full length performances. And it's not a booking conference. A lot of them weren't there to be booked, or I'm sure they'd love it. But it wasn't necessarily the point. It was really about sharing the art with people who get it, who can be inspired by it, and who can see something in it to collaborate with. And I loved the so many opportunities to see work. I think I saw 4 or 5 shows, like 2.5 days. I think you all saw a lot of those same things. So I'm wondering, like, what moments in that was like really delighting for you? What felt fresh or new, or like what like really inspired you in your work?
I'll say that I saw the Paper Escape and I felt like a 4-year-old. I was in the front row. And after the show, I got all up in their business and I was like looking behind there and I was like, is this okay? And they're like, actually, we do this with the students that see the show. As a person who makes theater, I found it really fascinating the way they used puppetry and paperwork to build this world. I just find the world of puppetry and using different materials to make us feel things to be so magical. So I thought that was a really magical performance. I loved, loved, loved that.
Yeah, as a presenter, I hit the jackpot on that being so close geographically and them not doing a public show during the conference. And so it came to my theater the following weekend, and I got to see it in our space. So I saved it to get to see it sort of on my turf. And yeah, it just was such a different way of creating puppetry, and it was incredible that it was made out of recycled materials and paper, and just the
Yeah.
fear I had of touring that far with paper.
Right. I did ask them about that too. Yeah. They do
Yeah.
have to do some repair work on their materials, but it holds up pretty good apparently.
Yeah.
And it was a great example of nonverbal performance as well, which I thought was really exciting.
Yeah.
One piece that really stuck out to me was Marooned, a space comedy. That was the show that I think kicked off the conference on the first day. I was not familiar with Alex and Olmsted's work, but was really blown away by it. The simplicity of it, but the profound nature of the story. It was funny, as the name implies, a space comedy, but really was poignant as well. I was explaining it to other folks at the conference that came later that didn't get to see it. And when I returned from the conference to colleagues at my organization, and I was like, it was sort of like the movie Gravity or the movie Interstellar if they were made in the guise of Pixar and created specifically for youth. It was like these stories of like an astronaut being stranded that I think we've seen in other pieces, but done in such a creative way, and the puppetry was beautiful. So I'm really excited about that show and the possibility of presenting it. I know Alex and Olmsted do tour. I'm not sure if they've toured as widely nationally. I think they're sort of unique to their area, but yeah, really excited about that piece and was really thrilled to be introduced to their work.
And
Brian,
also not nonverbal, not
Right.
completely nonverbal, right? But like really relying on all of the other
Yes.
tools.
The physicality of it and the projections and the puppetry. Yeah, it was really, really profound.
The interplay between the live actor work and the projected work was so beautifully done, where it kind of kept changing the scale from being like full size to seeing like the characters in miniature on these like tiny projections, and being able to watch the performers create those projections live so that you knew it wasn't just a recorded piece of video. Like, all of that was so magical. And the other thing, I felt like it was such an emotional performance. Like, it had all these wonderful, funny and hilarious moments, but then it like brought out these themes of like loneliness and abandonment. And, it was such a great example of going going to a place emotionally that the kids can understand and handle in a really sophisticated way, in a way that's also totally approachable for an audience of 6 and 7 year olds. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think approachable for people who aren't arts patrons already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really, it feels like the best possible audience set for a show that is intended for youth, that adults are going to really get something maybe even more profound out of it. Again, in that like Pixar way, it's a simple and like easy comparison point, but it really was. It was like a show that I think all ages would really delight in.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so the last treat that I think we all got at this conference was the opportunity to see a fully, they called it a staged reading, but like very, very fully, I don't want to say fully produced, but like 90% produced version of a new musical called Just Ask, which is based on the book written by Justice Sonia Sotomayor and directed by Fran Salou. It had premiered and done its run a few months earlier, and they brought the original actors, and it looked like at least most of the set that we got to see this musical, and then afterwards have a chance to listen to Justice Sotomayor and Fran talk about their development of that piece, the way that they worked together to create it, the actors' experience in it, and the real care that they took to honor the show or honor the story as well as just bring more people into it. So is there anything that like really stuck out to you in sort of that closing? It was very emotional to me of just, like everything that we had talked about that week sort of culminating in being there with somebody that I've admired from afar, up close, and not talking about the law or funding or big picture things, right? Just talking about loving each other and creating art. I just was such a treat.
It was so amazing. First of all, just to see Justice Sotomayor in person was like an absolute thrill. And she got this amazing standing ovation from all of us. And it went on for a long time. It was just, everybody in the room was so electric and excited. But then, like you said, to hear her talk about, this thing that she's so passionate about, this book that she wrote inspired by her own experience of having diabetes and being misunderstood by other people as she's, doing her insulin and kind of treating herself, and writing a book that extends to, people with all sorts of medical issues or developmental issues or whatever that kids might not understand, without asking a question of like, hey, what is that, or what does that mean? And this sort of beautifully loving and direct approach of encouraging communication and curiosity among people. She just lit up when she was talking about it. And like you said, she wasn't talking about decisions before the court. This was a whole other side to her that was very inspiring.
Yeah, I think she started the conversation by, to paraphrase, she said something to the effect of, "It's so nice to be introduced to a room without like my title attached to it." We were talking about her as an author and her as an artist and her collaboration and bringing her book to life on stage. So it was really wonderful to see that other side of her.
And her as a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was really cool. I think sometimes people in those positions, we forget that they're one of us, and she very much wanted it to feel as though she was one of us, which was cool, with all the Secret Service in the room.
Yeah.
I was teary too, and I thought, I'm not going to sit here and cry. And then I looked to my left and my right, and both the women on either side of me were like fully just like just losing it. I think what was said across the board is that we all needed that moment. And it wasn't a lovely culmination of the experience that we'd all had throughout the sessions and our lunches in between, talking about what are we going to do to make everyone, from the very young children who come to our shows to the parents and their grandparents and everyone in between, feel as though they belong here. And the whole theme of that performance was everyone belongs here. I was so struck by the fact that everyone in the performance had actually lived the experiences that they portrayed on stage. And that was talked about in the workshop about Just Ask as well, that the script is actually written loose enough so that where you can find the actors who have different lived experiences and incorporate their experiences into the script. I'm like, this is new level. Yeah, I thought it all was just really, really beautiful. And I have a new friend who didn't have a chance to go to this conference, but she's a deaf filmmaker. And many times when we get together, it's through a Zoom call or something, and she hires an interpreter. And I remember something that she said to me was, when I hire an interpreter, it's not for me, it's for us. This is access for everyone. You get a better experience from this as well as I do. And that really struck me thinking about that when I saw that performance, is that it's not just for the kids in the audience who have diabetes or who have autism or have ADHD. It was for all of us to be closer and have this inclusivity that we all can share. And that was, I think, the part that struck everybody.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and the director who put so much love and care into this, Fran, talked a lot about the way that he took the book and made it into more of a narrative. And he added this community garden element of it that they were taking care of. And the reason being that he didn't want the plot to kind of center around somebody with a disability being the bad guy, and for people to see, where disability is often portrayed as something bad or negative, that all of these people were working together and had the ability. And I thought that that was such a wonderful way to adapt a piece of work and to still be able to be an advocate and to share fully created characters. And I think that's also just why it's so important to have people who have all kinds of lived experience in the room when you're creating something. And it was so clear. It was so clear why it's important. I just left so full of life after that.
I think it's really smart the way they've designed the show to have, as Ashley mentioned, that flexibility in casting where they can take this piece to new school communities or new TYA companies and allow for those lived experiences of the cast to inform their characters. I've never known about another piece like that. So I think that ensures that this piece is going to have a long life and also allow for actors of all abilities to really have a really great experience in TYA.
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating producing idea because it really puts so much power into the hands of the cast members themselves, and where like each show that unique cast is like devising the play to fit those unique actors in this really beautiful style. And in a way too, that the way that the script is written, like I felt like everybody in the audience could like see a part of themselves in the characters on stage, even if we didn't share those different abilities, or if there, it was so human and beautiful that way.
Yeah, I remember in the workshop he was like, usually you have a script and you're like, okay, I'm looking for like a purple person purple with stripes, a person with pink hair, and then like you go out and you look for that person, and instead he's totally flipping it and saying, okay, who do we have and what can we build? And that just, no matter abilities aside, any of those sorts of things, that is such a monumental thought and so forward thinking. I'm like, this is progress. This is pretty cool. And this can be applied to any situation, especially when you're talking about theater, when you're including young people who have different kinds of abilities in terms of talent and things like that. And he even said, like we might have a dynamic singer, but their voice is quiet. How can we create the music so that everything else stops? So we have this beautiful quiet moment with this actor, and we've got to see some of that stuff play out on stage. And I was like, oh, that's what he was talking about. No, that's the moment where he said, there's an individual in the current cast that has a cane. Instead of saying, how do we work around this? Saying, how can we use that cane to have an even bigger moment? And that actor had said, this is the first time ever my history of acting that someone's actually tried to figure out how to enhance the fact that I have a cane rather than hide it. Those are really fascinating elements that I think we can apply to all kinds of parts of our lives, really.
Yeah, and I was just really curious about the book itself, and I learned about it because of this conference. So I bought a copy of it and I read it to my kindergarten age sons, because there were things in there that we've talked about before, but maybe not explicitly. And at each page, they were just so interested to like understand, and it was just so plainly understand. The language not putting necessarily like a negative or any kind of intention on it. It's just like, this is this. And each page gave us an opportunity to talk about that person and like what their body experiences, and like why it's not something that makes them any less, right? And even just on the page of talking about like, oh yeah, and they're playing this game and they're doing this, right? Like all of these other like full person things where it's like everything isn't just about this one part of them. So, I definitely encourage to look at the book. Like I said, it was a new story to me, and I'm so glad that I found it. And I also I want to thank you all for coming here with us today and for having this conversation. I think TYA is my favorite thing to talk about, and so I've known most of you for a very long time, and it's so nice to hear your thoughts on like a shared experience that we had, and think about kind of what the future looks like. But obviously, none of this would have happened without TYA USA and their wonderful staff of Sarah, Stephen, Rachel, and their board. They did an incredible job putting this conference together, making everyone feel welcome. And everything they do is wonderful. We want to just really thank them. And they didn't ask us to do this episode. After seeing everything that happened, I really just wanted to elevate a lot of these conversations, really put an emphasis on them and the work that they're doing right now in our field. Also, Imagination Stage and Venture Theater hosted the conference and really just highlighted some wonderful actors and just communities that are here in the DC region. They did an incredible job. And then again, big thank you to Brian, Ashley, and Sarah for joining us here today in all different time zones.
Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah.
This was great.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we'll catch you next time. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
behind the scenes.
I love this so much.
I'm glad it was you that had someone come into the room. not
I was going to say,
me.
Sarah and I regularly, it's kind of a miracle that neither of us.
I know. I've been paranoid that my dog is going to start barking at any minute.
I love that it was a note. Did you get a special secret note?
Yeah, what did that say?
Oh my gosh. No, you don't.
I don't want to tell
Never
you.
mind.
No, don't tell us. I love the way in which it was presented. That was the best part.
Okay.
Oh, that's so good.
So I want to respect your time, so we're going to keep going. I'm not going to tell you what's on my note.
Good.